Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'm going to start the recording with just a couple of questions. We'll actually start to share in a minute or two. We'll give people time to sign on. Just a couple quick questions just to get started. If you opened a book that was called Sefer Shoftim, what would you expect the topic of the book to be? Yeah, Moshe, you're smiling.
You'd expect it to be the judges, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, the word judge in general actually was a very good topic. It's the timing couldn't be any better with Israeli news today. When you have the judge, what do judges usually do? Do they judge, or are they politicians, or are they judges?
Judges.
Yeah. And so what issues do they deal with?
Civil and criminal.
Okay, whatever. Cases come to the judge, and he has to make a judgment call. But if you have a military leader, is he referred to as a judge? How many military leaders do you know that are called judges? And if you know Israeli news, when judges get involved with army issues, it's I'm not taking sides or anything in the argument, but it gets complicated. No, let people, when you fight a war, and a judge is a judge. But the name for military leaders and military leadership, even political leaders, are not judges. Now, is there a commandment in Chumash to appoint judges?
Yes.
Okay. What parsha is that in?
Shoftim.
Exactly. Now, what's their job? Shoftim v'shotrim b'munah bahar titem b'chol shorach v'shaftu otam mishpat tzedek tzedek tirdov man tichya v'yarash ha'aretz. The job of judges is to judge the people. We have a book of Shoftim, and they look more like they're more political leaders than they are judging the people. And on top of that, they're not they're viewed as political leaders, even though most of the things they're doing are military. Now, if you go through the list of the judges, especially the ones that are detailed, how many judges are described? Do we describe the military accomplishments?
Lot.
Yeah. Basically every single one. They're called Moshi'im, aren't they? They help the people. How many stories do we have about judges actually judging the people?
Stories?
Is there a story about Gid'on judging people?
No.
Does anyone sit behind a tree and judge people?
Dvora.
Okay, but it's only mentioned in passing, correct? But we don't hear any. We don't have a case of two mothers fighting over one child, correct? We don't have mishpat shlomo or anything like that. Now, there's going to be one shofet later on. There'll be one shofet that's actually known for doing mishpat.
Shmuel.
Exactly. And now I think that was my little introduction. Now, we usually compare shofet as opposed to a king. And we'll see the main topic of the book will be more about kings than judges, we'll see. But like we did last week, and that's the main point I'm trying to do in my shiurim, we're not going to study each individual story. What's the purpose of the book? I tried to do that with Sefer Yoshua in the first class. If it's a book of Devim, it's written by a Navi for a prophetic purpose. I want to understand what's the prophetic purpose of the book. And I don't need a Navi to teach me history. A historian can write history. I can open up Divrei Yamim to any king, not our Divrei Yamim, but every king or every kingdom writes its history. Historians write history. A prophet is going to write a book that guides our history and our relationship with God. So I need to find a prophetic reason for the book, and I'm going to follow Chazal that Sefer Shoftim was written by Shmuel HaNavi, correct? Now, was Shmuel HaNavi living in the time of Sefer Shoftim?
The end.
Maybe at the very end. But we don't hear about him until Sefer Shmuel. Now, is Shmuel called a shofet?
Yeah, at the beginning.
No, we'll see. It says in the end of chapter 7. It was said explicitly. Does he do mishpat? We'll see in a minute. Sure he does. We'll see exactly what shvita he does. Does he bring military help? There's one sort of story that maybe he does. He does in a roundabout way. But I want to find an issue that I need a prophet for. Remember, a prophet represents God or gives. I'm looking for an issue that's in the time of Shmuel that requires I call it psak nevui. what major issue is facing the Jewish people during the life of Shmuel that requires prophetic guidance? There's one major national issue that requires a decision that we need a Navi for. When you open up Chumash, the answer isn't clear. Anyone want to guess what it's going to be? What are the major issues facing Am Yisrael during the time of Shmuel?
Going to war.
Well, if you go to war when you have to, pretty much. Some countries go to war when they want to, but most countries only go to war when they have to, when people attack them.
Whether there should be a king?
Does that topic come up in the question whether or not we should appoint a king? Does that come up during the life of Shmuel? Doesn't it? That's big time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially when he's getting old, the people say we want a king. Now, what does Shmuel hold about a king? What's his approach? Good idea or bad idea?
Bad idea.
Yeah. Shmuel thinks it's a bad idea. And is there a machloket between Shmuel and anybody else? Remember, Shmuel and Rav usually like to argue with each other. So who's Shmuel bar Plukta?
God.
Shmuel? Yeah. There's a machloket between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Shmuel about giving them a king. How do we paskin?
God.
We paskin by God, don't we? Now, I want to claim the simplest thing possible. What I want to claim is that our Sefer Shoftim was written by Shmuel to explain God's psak. Don't mean by psak? No, it's God's decision to give them a king, even though Shmuel thinks it's a bad idea. Shmuel has to explain why he thinks it's a bad idea, but why God says it's a good idea. You with me? That's something I need a Navi for. I need a Navi as God's spokesperson. So the question of appointing a king is a big question. It requires a Navi, either whether the very institution of a king is allowed or what's the right time for a king. We'll see in a minute. But I want to read the book of Sefer Shoftim to come to explain to the people why there's a good reason why Shmuel thinks we shouldn't have a king, but why God's decision overrides it. Why does God want a king even though Shmuel thinks it's a bad idea? Why does God think it's a good idea even though it's a bad idea? Okay? And the implications for nowadays, we'll see, I think are pretty interesting, I would say. Not defining, but interesting. Now, if I go back to Chumash, does Chumash tell us about whether or not you should have a king?
Yes. Sure.
So let's take a quick look. I'm going to open up my Chumash for a second and take a look in. Let's give me a Chumash here for a second. One Chumash coming up. Dvarim, okay? So look, when Chumash says you need to do something, look how explicit it is. Where are we? No, you mean Perek Tet Zayin, my mistake. The end of Tet Zayin. How do you like this? Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol sharecha. Now that's a commandment, isn't it? Not if, when, babam. No, it's you have to have shoftim. V'shaftu otem mishpat tzedek, lo totem mishpat, etc. Now, the shoftim and Sefer Shoftim are not these people, that's for sure. They're not tzedek tirdov. But that we need no matter what. In the next chapter, this whole section in Devarim is about leadership and different types of leadership. It says as follows. When you come to the land, Pasuk Yudalid, which I'm giving to you, and you conquer it, and you settle it, sounds like Sefer Yoshua, doesn't it? And then you say, Asim alai melech, I want a king. Now there's two ways to read this line. I can say Kechol HaGoyim or Kechol HaGoyim. Now, you understand the difference in Kechol HaGoyim or Kechol HaGoyim? Do we want a king because we want to be like the Goyim, like the other nations? And that's something negative. We don't want to be God's people. We want to be our own people. And all normal people have kings. We also want a monarchy like everybody else because we don't need God. Do we want to be and act like Goyim in that way? Or do we want to be a nation? And to be a nation, you need a strong political system. I need a strong central government. And then it goes to the question, why does God want a nation in the first place? So if there's a religious value in having a nation, and according to Sefer Bereshit that we read last week, when God picked Abraham Avinu, he said, Goy Gadol, I want you to be a great nation. And to be a great nation, we'll see the word Goy Gadol. To be a great nation, you need strong central government. And to have a strong central government in ancient times, a kingdom was probably the best way to do it. That's what everyone else had. So it could be the desire to have a kingdom is not to run away from God, but to be able to serve God better. Because if the way we serve God is through our national behavior, then having a king can enable us to accomplish our covenantal goal to be a nation representing God. So therefore, now, how come it's worded in such a strange way? It doesn't say it's a bad idea. It doesn't say you have to. It says when you want to, then there's a commandment. Now I'm going to give you a really bad analogy, which hope you'll understand. According to Chazal, there's a chiyuv to get married. I'm pretty sure, based on Pru. But that doesn't mean that. But if someone gets married only because there's an obligation, but they don't want to get married, it's not very healthy. If I take that analogy, there's a value in establishing a strong central government. But if you tell the people you have to do it because it's a mitzvah, and there isn't political maturity of a nation that they want to have a king. If the nation doesn't want to be a nation, appointing a king because you have to is not going to work. I'll give you a better example of nowadays. Let's say there's a chiyuv to serve in the army. So if you serve in the army but you don't want to be in the army, you have no motivation to be a soldier. You just want to. You're not interested. You won't be a good soldier. The army doesn't need you, without being political. You want a soldier. You want a soldier in the army who wants to serve in the army, who wants to accomplish a goal, who wants to serve his country and do the best he can. The same thing. If the nation isn't mature enough, if they're not ready for a king, that's something you can't command only because it's a command. You need a certain, you need a political Yetzirah to want a kingdom. Now, if you want a king, God's going to give you guidance how to do it. But it's got to come what's called from the bottom up. There's certain commandments that have to come from the bottom up and not from the top down. And that's the idea of political leadership. The country has to go through political maturity. I'll give you a really good example. Who is our first king in Jewish history? I would, according to Chazal, maybe according to Chumash, is Moshe Rabbeinu. Remember by Yibishu Melech? So Chazal is saying that in what way was Moshe a king? A strong central leadership, like one government, one person running a country has the idea of a king. Now, there's the idea of a dynasty, that's something else. The Moshe kids don't take over for him, do they? But when Moshe, it's time to die, what does he do? He turns to God and says, God, you appoint a king. Now, what was the other part? Remember, God tells Moshe it's time to die. God doesn't tell Moshe right away, appoint Yeshua. First, Moshe tells God, I need a successor. And Moshe demands, in fact, the only time when it says, Vaydaber Moshe el Hashem, when Moshe talks or speaks harshly to God, Moshe demands from God, you appoint a king, you appoint a leader. What would have been another possibility? Had God not appointed a leader, there would have been no king or no leader?
Israel could have chosen.
That's right. Now, when Moshe says, you better appoint a leader, what's Moshe worried about? They're going to appoint the wrong person. Now, when you're in first grade, the teacher appoints a class president. In high school, the teacher appoints a class president. The students pick it because they're more mature. So what Moshe is saying is that Moshe is telling God, you can't trust these people to pick their own leader. Now, later in Sefer Shmuel, do the people pick their own leader, or does God force that on them? Hope you're catching on where I'm going. The commandment to establish a king is only when the people ask for a king. God can't demand set up a kingdom. When the people ask for a king, then it's time for a king. But God has to wait for the people to want a king. You with me? That's good. And that fits with Chumash perfectly. But it's not saying like later in the Devarim it says if you go to war and you find an Eshe Fator, so it doesn't mean you should, but that's sort of giving into your Sahara. But it says when you come to the land of Israel and bring your first fruits, then bring your Bikurim, that's fine. That's something good. When it says Ki Tavah La'aretz and you want to do something, sometimes it's negative, sometimes it's positive. But I think when it says when you come to land and you say Asim Elai Melech, the commandment to set up a kingdom, to set up to pick a king, has to be has to come from the people. Now, who needs to be the king? What's God say? Som tasim el melech asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha bo. Now, then who appoints the king then? Do the people appoint the king? Does God appoint the king? You have the same thing with Hamakom asher yivchar Hashem, right? The Shichnot Tidushu, remember? Hamakom asher yivchar Hashem l'shechem shmo sham, the Shichnot Tidushu bat hashama. God has to nominate a place. Maybe if the people don't want it, it's not going to work. It's got to be a process where God's involved and the people are involved. But picking a king has to begin with the people wanting a king. After the people want a king, God can help guide them who the king should be. And therefore, when the people ask for a king, that's when the obligation begins. Now, here's the trick. What I want to explain is, Sefer Shoftim comes to explain why God says yes. Now, think for a minute, because you've read already all these prakim and most of Sefer Shoftim you've read. Was there ever a time before Shmuel when the people asked for a king? Who can tell me?
With Gid'on.
With Gid'on, right? Now, they don't say king, but they mean king. It's what they say. Remember, Mashol banu atal, bincha ben bincha. You, your son, your grandson, they're basically saying, Shmuel, because you are a great leader, we want you to be president, your son to be president, your grandson maybe. It's a minhag nowadays also. No, it's if you're
more of a military leader.
They're asking, but basically, when they ask for a king at the time of Shmuel, they're asking for a military, aren't they? He should say someone who will lead us in battle. Yeah. What makes the king a military leader? If you wanted to, in social studies, what makes a country a country? Two things. You need to be a country. There's two things you need. You have to have an army and be able to collect taxes. Now, if you can't collect taxes, you can't pay an army. If you don't have an army, you can't collect taxes. They go hand in hand. So the king is always in charge of the army until you get to the American continent. Even in the American Constitution, the president is not a king, but he's still the head. He's a chief of staff, because you can't. Someone's got to be in charge of the army. Now back to Sefer Shoftim. Gid'on, the people turned to Gid'on and said, "We want you to be king, or like a king." What was Gid'on's reaction? Anyone remember? What did Gid'on say?
No.
It's from his kabir, right? You don't need a king. God's your king. Now, what happened after Gid'on? That's all. That's going to be the point of the shir. Right? Gid'on says no, and what's the result when you're looking at historically? What happens to the Jewish people after Gid'on said no?
Avimelech.
So, yeah, we got Avimelech, which is the most ironic name of almost a satirical name, right? Now, who named Avimelech? You remember?
Gid'on.
I don't think so. It says Vayesav. I think he named himself Avimelech. Give me a proof that Avimelech would never name his son Avimelech. Because what's Avimelech mean? That my father is king. Now, only a king is going to name his son Avimelech. And he's only going to name his son who wants to become king. If you wanted his son to become king, Avimelech, with the last one, would get the name. He wouldn't give it a birth. And then number two, Gid'on himself says he doesn't want to become king. There's no way that Gid'on names his son Avimelech. Avimelech names himself Avimelech. And to make sure that he's only one, he kills his 70 brothers. Luckily, one gets away. Now, all the detail about Avimelech we'll see is going to be, in my point, the pivotal point and the main point of the book. And let me explain why. And I'll share my little source sheet. If I analyze the book, where are we? Okay, the first, we'll leave the first chapter alone. It's a sort of a preface to the book. We'll leave it alone for now. The book begins in Perek Bet, in the middle of Perek Bet, with the famous thesis about the famous cycle, which we all know about. In other words, what happened? The people leave God. God sends an enemy to punish them. They get into trouble. They cry out to God for help. God sends a shofet, and then there's quiet. And to prove that thesis, in other words, Shmuel begins the book stating his thesis. His thesis is, what's the reason for the cycle? It's what's happening all the time. Every time we leave God, there's trouble. When we get into trouble from an outside enemy, the people cry out to God, they do tshuva. When the people do tshuva, God sends a shofet to save them. And after he saves them, there's quiet, usually for 40 years. Now, the first set of shoftim prove the point, and notice they're all multiples of 40 years. So Niel is shofet for 40 years. And then Ehud, 80 years, but includes Shamgar. Devorah, 40 years, Gid'on, 40 years. Now, I want to take a time out for a minute. Speaking of typological numbers, it can't be that it just so happened each one's 40 years. 40 years is the typological number in Chumash. Give me some examples. The number 40.
Mabul.
Yeah, the Mabul, 40 days and 40 nights. Har Sinai, 40 days and 40 nights. The Meraglim, 40 days and 40 nights. That can't be by chance. 400 years of Brit Ben Avtarim, at 40 times 10. That can't be by chance. 480 years from the time of Yitzat Mitzrayim to Shlomo Bil Mikdash. It's just 40 without getting to its deeper meaning. But Chumash uses numbers not like we use numbers. 40 is like remember Abrim Shana Kut Bador. 40 years is something special. The number 40, there's something usually goes together with God's name Yud Kei Vav Kei and God watching our history. Remember, number 7 goes with Elokim and Yud Kei Vav Kei goes with 40. But that's a whole different shir. That's a theme that goes through Chumash. But there's a historical meaning to 40 of God behind our history. Now, but all those shoftim of the 40 years, they're all good. I could fetch a little bit and find something bad about all of them. But bottom line, there's nothing obviously negative about them. Niel, nothing bad at all. Ehud seems to be fine. Devorah seems to be fine. Gid'on, maybe only at the end. But they're all good shoftim that bring Yeshua. Now, they seem more like ad hoc leadership. In other words, there was an institution, there's always a shofet who's taking over. Whenever there was trouble, they appointed a shofet. I call it like more of a fire department than a standing government. But every leadership was at the shevet level. Every shevet had their own army ever since Chumash. But it's more of a tribal alliance than a united 12 tribes. After Gid'on, we have the story of Abimelech that doesn't fit the pattern at all. The pattern of the cycle doesn't exist by Abimelech. Instead, the guy is a disaster. He's the anomaly of a king. Okay? No. Remember, it doesn't fit to the title. Then there's 2 more shoftim that have details. There's a lot of one-liner shoftim, which we'll deal with maybe if we have time later on, what they're doing there. But I'm talking about the shoftim that have stories about them, that fit the cycle. Yiftach sort of fits the cycle and a little bit Shimshon, but not as much as the other ones. In fact, Yiftach begins where the cycle breaks. God's not going to answer them anymore. In the end, God answers them, but Yiftach has a terrible ending, doesn't it? We end up with a terrible civil war, not to mention the story with his daughter. Shimshon is not your ideal leader by far. So the ending is pretty, we kill some Plishtim, but nothing much comes of the story. We don't get rid of the Plishtim. We don't get rid of them until the time of King David. Shaul mostly, then later King David finishes them off. But the last 2 Shoftim, Yiftach and Shimshon, are the only, but basically Abimelech, Yiftach, and Shimshon are stories that go out of its way to say how they're not the typical leader. Give me an example why Yiftach is at the bottom of the totem pole of Jewish leadership. Give me a rabbinic statement that puts Yiftach at the bottom.
Yiftach Medaro, Shmuel Medaro.
When we compare leadership, whoever's leader is leader, no matter who you're stuck with. You can have a great leader like Shmuel or a terrible one like Yiftach. What makes him bad? Primarily the civil war at the end. And imagine what he does in the beginning. He's a guy who has military ability. They want him to help. They want him to join the army, to help with the army. What condition does he make? You ever hear such a thing? I'm willing to be Ramatkal. I'm willing to run the army if you make me prime minister. Unheard of, right? That whole idea that the whole motivation of helping your nation in battle is if I get political power from it. That's already a sign of bad leadership. No matter what's everyone's smiling for some reason. Now what I want to claim is that even though Gid'on gave a good firm answer, and it makes sense what he's saying, from historical hindsight, what's it look like? When the right guy says no, who's going to fill the vacuum? The wrong guy. What I want to claim is that even though Shmuel is right, we'll explain why he's right in a minute, historically, he's wrong. Why? Because when the people are finally right for leadership, and the people who should take leadership say, oh, you don't need a God's a leader, someone else will take leadership, and it'll be the wrong people. And the book goes out of its way to show how bad it is when Gid'on says no. So the last time the people asked for a king, the right person said no. And what happened? A disaster. Our derivative goes negative. Now things fall apart in our national history. We go from bad to worse. Avimelech Yiftach Shimshon leads to a terrible time. Like by the time Sefer Shmuel opens up, we hit rock bottom. Recovery will start with Shmuel, with Tfilat Chana. And what God is telling Shmuel, even though you have a good reason why we shouldn't have a king, right? don't miss the opportunity to have a king. I want to compare it to modern day history. Remember Rav Kook? Oh, there's this movement by secular Jews in Europe. Oh, let's start a Jewish nation for all the wrong reasons. Not to be God's people, but rather for political reasons, by secular Jews. Therefore, most of the rabbis of Europe were against it. What did Rav Kook say? There's a spark called a nitzot. Even though they're asking for all the wrong reasons, there's potential. At least they want to start a nation. There's a drop of kedusha there. There's a nitzot of something good there. Don't fight it. Work with it. Take that as a spark, and take that spark and turn it into a lantern. Make it something big. And don't fight them. Work with them. That was Rav Kook's approach. I think, if I understood Rav Kook right. I oversimplified it, but I think that's an approach. Now, so my claim is the point of the book is made by its structure. Why? By making all the Shoftim in the beginning, fitting the pattern, Otniel, Ehud, Devorah, and Gid'on, all 40 years or 80, and very positive. And then the last event with Gid'on saying, remember, and Gid'on was someone who God chose him. Remember, he chose him for leadership. He breaks idols. He has all the similarities between Gid'on being appointed and Moshe Rabbeinu. Lots of them are there. In his Hakdashah. Gid'on has more credentials than anybody to become the leader or to become a king. And he says, no, we get the exact opposite. We get the worst guy instead. If you want, if I have time, I'll give you a little example from the story of David and Bathsheba with Yoav, which mentions Abimelech, and it'll help explain what we're doing here. Now, I want to take a minute now and explain two things. One is the stories at the end of the book. That'll be next week's share, and how they take us into Sefer Shmuel as well. But they're coming to highlight the point: what happens when you don't have a king? When you don't have a king, your education system falls apart. Your religion, everything falls apart without a king. There's a price you pay for not having strong central leadership. That'll be the point at the end of the book. We'll deal with that next week. I want to explain. I want to explain Shmuel's political opinion. What's he saying? If you look at a graph of Jewish history during the time of the Shoftim, there's a pattern going on, and basically things go from bad to worse. But there's a cycle going on where there's times of good and times of trouble. There's over and over again we have enemies who give us a hard time, and every once in a while, someone comes, takes leadership, and defeats our enemy, and then we have quiet, and then there's trouble again. Now, whenever we have a pattern like that, if you have any friends who have what's called hedge funds, you know what those are? They spend all day looking at graphs, like 5 different computer screens on their desk. What are they looking for? They're looking for not only patterns, but cause. What causes the market to go up and what causes it to go down? If I can figure out what the cause is, I can make a fund. Notice, if I can figure out what causes the market to go up and what causes the market to go down, then I'll be able to know when to invest, where to invest, and then you can support yeshivot. Now, back to Shmuel's theory. What Shmuel's saying, everyone agrees there's been ups and downs. Everyone agrees every once in a while we have a strong leader who's successful, and every once in a while we're falling to our enemies. What Shmuel's saying, what's the cause of all your trouble? The reason you have so much trouble is why? Is because you left God. And what's he prove? Every time you left God and followed other gods, you had trouble. Every time you turned to God, things got better. And therefore, if you want life to be good, don't leave God. So his whole point is, if you want to prevent military trouble, stay from. Don't serve other gods. And he proves it by saying every time we served other gods, things went bad. Every time we turned to God and prayed, things got better. That's what a rabbi should tell the people. What are the people saying? You got it all wrong. When were things good? When we had a strong leader and we put together a quick army. When were things bad? When we didn't have leadership. I can take the same data that Shmuel's using and interpret it differently. I can say, when were things good? When we had strong leadership. When were things bad? When we didn't have strong leadership. Therefore, what's the solution to our problems? Instead of a fire department, strong leadership all the time. When were things good? When we had a leader who put an army together and gathered some tribes together to fight a war, and we win those wars. When were things bad? When we didn't have leadership. And therefore, what's the solution? Leadership all the time. Instead of a fire department, a standing government. You have an army, a full-time army, etc. Now, when the people ask for a king, that's exactly what they're saying. We want a king who's going to organize an army. We'll read that in a minute. And Shmuel is saying, no, what do you call it? That's not the reason. You have it all wrong. Now, both of them are taking the same data and giving a different analysis. What's the reason for the ups and what's the reason for the downs? And we're going to see both of them are right. Because from a political point of view, take any situation in any country. What's the reason for the ups and downs? Read Makor Rishon, you get one analysis. Read Hamodia, you get another analysis. Read Mariv, you get a different analysis. In other words, every paper, depending on their hashkafa, everyone has their understanding, and whatever data there is will fit into their understanding. Now, I want to show you where all this is in Sefer, where the reason for Sefer Shmuel, for Sefer Shoftim is in Sefer Shmuel. And for that, we need Perek Yud Bet in Sefer Shmuel. And I'll open up the source sheet again, and we'll read. Now, I'll just use a regular Tanakh, it'll be easier. Let me open up a 1 Samuel, here we are. The end of chapter 11. Shmuel tells the people, let's go to Gilgal. After Shaul won that battle against Ammon, was successful. All the people come to Gilgal, and they make Shaul king, and they have Shlamim again, and everyone's happy. Now, it's the second coronation of Shaul when it's official, when the critics stop accept him finally, but the Bnei Belial don't make fun of him anymore. Shmuel gives his famous speech. This is the Haftarah for Parshat Korach. That's why people are familiar. Shmuel tells the people, make it smaller. Here we go. Shmuel tells the people, I heard what you want. I give you a king. Here's your king. I'm getting old. Okay. And here's your king. Okay. Now, then he comes clean. That's why it's for Parshat Korach, where he says, tell anybody, that's the reason why we read it for Parshat Korach, because Moshe says something similar when that time Aviram complained about his leadership. Okay. The people say, no, you've been clean, and that's fine. Then, after Shmuel cleans the air with his leadership, he now presents a new king. Listen carefully. These psukim are key to understanding Sefer Shoftim. Notice, what I want to claim is, this book, this ceremony here, when they coronate Shaul as king, the final one, is the reason for Shmuel writing Sefer Shoftim. Maybe he gave out a copy at the coronation ceremony. Maybe yes, maybe no, but the book fits exactly to this situation. Listen carefully. Remember Shmuel Elam. Hashem Aser said Moshe bet Aaron, Asher said Avotenu Meretz Mitzrayim. The God of our history, the God who gave us leadership. Remember the great leaders in the beginning were Moshe and Aaron, and the God who took us out of Egypt with their agency. Vata hityatzvu vishtafta itchem. Follow that word. Listen, standard attention. I'm going to be judgment. I'm going to judge you. I'm going to be judgmental of you in front of God. I want to show you all throughout history, God's always been right and you've always been wrong. When we have a case, who's been right and who's been wrong. So then I'm going to be judgmental of you to show you in all your arguments, you've always been wrong, God's always been right. And look how God's been so good to you and you've been so unfaithful to God. And he starts the cycle of Sefer Shoftim from going down to Egypt. He's starting the cycle of things going bad and then crying out to God and God sending a Moshiach. It's called Tzara Tzaka Yeshua. God took us out of Egypt and brings us back here. Then the next two psukim are not talking about individual events, but a set of events, the whole time period. It brings three examples of we left God, and who did God send to punish us? Different examples. He sent Sisra, that's the story with Devorah. He sent the Plishtim, that's already later with Shimshon, with Yiftach. Biad Melech Moav, the story of Ehud. Okay? And they fought us. When we had trouble from all these outside enemies, it's not one event, it's a set of events. We cried out to God, okay? And we did Shuvah, we said we sinned because we left God, because we served these other gods, etc. And now we pray to you, God, save us from our enemies. And we'll serve you. Who did God send? Vaishlach Hashem et Yerubal, vet Bedan, vet Yiftach, vet Shmuel. Not all the Shoftim, but a lot of them. See, Shmuel is one of the Shoftim. Aren't these psukim exactly the cycle in Sefer Shoftim? It's exactly what it's going to be in Perek Bet in the introduction to the book. This is the cycle of Sefer Shoftim. Now, after the cycle, every time there's trouble, we turn to God and we need to pray to get God to help us. The people were sick of this prayer meetings. And what happened now? Vatiru ki Nachash melech b'nei Ammon ba'alechem. Now there's a new war with Nachash, b'nei Ammon. And then Vatomru li lo. Let's just mix that up. What's this? And you told me no. Wait a second, go forward. Forward. Wait a second. Next chapter. Chapter 12. Here we go. Okay. You saw, I'm sorry, here again. You saw Nachash was coming. What's he saying? But really low. What's it mean? You told me no. I told you do tshuva again, and you but no. We don't want to do this whole tshuva process. We want a king already. We're sick of this process. We want a king, okay? And God's your king, okay? You know, what did you want? Instead of having to daven and turn to God, you wanted to take care of things on your own. We have this cycle. Usually you cried out to God. This time around, you didn't cry out to God. You just said, I want a king. He'll fight our battles for us. And God's your king. Now God said, and now he says, and now here's your king, who you want. And God gave you a king. But on what condition? It's not going to help you. Why? If you listen to God and follow God and don't go against him, then you and your king will be successful. Okay? If you don't listen to God, okay, and you rebel against God, God will punish you, and your king won't help you. Got it? So he's saying, no, here's your king, but don't think it's going to solve your problem. If you continue to sin, God will continue to have wars, etc., like that. No matter what political system you set up, it's not going to help you if you don't follow God. And as a sign, he gives a famous event. He says, everyone stand and look what's going to happen. It's grain harvest season. We don't want rain during grain harvest season. I'm going to call out to God, and it's going to rain. And a big rainstorm comes, what's called Geshem B'Yom Katzir, rain on a harvest day, which is really bad. And the people get all scared. It's miraculous, number one, and it's scary. And even though rain is usually good, at the wrong time it's bad. We'll talk about that mashal in a minute. And the people tell Shmuel, oh my gosh, pray for us. We must have sinned terribly. Okay? And they're doing tshuva. They're saying, okay, big mistake, no king. What should Shmuel do now? Shmuel say, okay, no king, let's go back to the normal system. But Shmuel says no. Shmuel says this was just a sign. Here's your king, and he's going to give a reason, and this explains the whole book now, the whole book of Shoftim. Don't be afraid. Your motivations were bad. You asked for the wrong reasons, and therefore, remember, don't go astray from God, and don't follow all these other bad ideas. They won't help you. But why is God giving you a king? Listen carefully. God cares about his reputation, his great name. The biggest theme we'll see all through Tanakh. God chooses a nation to make his name known, to promote the idea of godliness. God enters an eternal covenant with the people to make his reputation great. We say that every day in Kedusha. Remember, we want God's name to be greater and greater. We sanctify God's name by how we behave and how we talk. And then, why? God wants you to be a nation. And to be a nation, you need a strong central government. And in ancient time, a strong central government meant usually a kingdom. And therefore, he's saying, even though you're asking for the wrong reasons, but at least you want a king. And now God's telling them, I'm giving you a king. Even though your motivations were bad, there's something great potential here. And don't think I'm leaving you. What's the job of the Navi now? The job of the Navi is not to run the country, but rather to guide the government.
A close spot last time I tried.
That was that question. That was a chat off. So, Izzy, hit unmute again, okay? Yeah. Okay. What's he say? The job of the Navi now is not to run the country. I need a Navi in the government to guide the country, not to decide what's kosher and what's not kosher, to make sure there's kosher food in the king's palace, but rather in government meetings when we have moral decisions to be made or guidance or priorities. I need a Navi. I need a Navi guiding the king, not telling the king what to do, but guiding the king to make sure the way he runs his country is with justice and righteousness and godliness. That's right. But political leaders should run the country. Military leaders should run the army. but they need religious guidance to make sure that they act in a way that sanctifies God through, and the Torah is going to be their God. And therefore, if you fear God and serve God be'emet with your whole heart, then God can do great with you. And if you do evil, you and your king are going to go down. Now, to prove his point that what? Now, it's Shmuel, the one has to prove his point that the real reason where things were going bad was because you left God. That's the cycle. On the other hand, he has to prove his point why God's giving a king, even though they're asking for the wrong reason. And that's the change in the book after Gid'on. So the structure of the book, presenting the cycle, showing that Shmuel, that Shitat Shmuel, that Shmuel was right. The real reason for the trouble is you're leaving God. That's how I have everyone up to Gid'on. To explain God's Shita, why this is an opportunity, because when we ask for a king and we say no, it only gets bad, that's going to be from Avimelech to the end. And through the structure of the book and its presentation, especially when we get to the chapters there next week, we'll see how Shmuel, when he writes Sefer Shoftim, he's coming to explain what I call why God is agreeing to a king, even though they're asking for the wrong reason. So I hope that was, that's the main point I want to get across. When you study Sefer Shmuel, if I look at the my chart again, where's my chart? Share, and here we go. Again, if I look at the structure of the book, it should all make more sense now. Put these guys to the side here. What do we have? In the beginning of the book, we state the thesis in Perek Bet. He says, after Shmuel, here's what happened. Here was the thing. He proves the thesis in chapters 3 through 8 with all the good Shoftim. Then we have the story of Avimelech, which ends with 40 years again. I'm sorry, after Gid'on, it was 40 years. The last event is when he said, you need a king. And then we have a little Chet Ego story where he means well, like Aaron did, and went astray. And he wanted to say, he makes this ephod to show that God's your king, you don't need a king. And then they ended up serving the ephod. So there's all the parallels between that story and Chet Ego, where the leader meant well but went bad. And then this Avimelech is the exact opposite of religious leadership, of ideal leadership, taking power totally by force with all the bumps, etc. And then the leadership, Yitzhak and Shimshon, falling apart. So my claim is that by showing how when the right person said yes, and when the right person in the job said no, how bad things go, the next time in Jewish history that people are ripe for a king, God wants to make sure that leadership doesn't say no again, say yes, but guide the people to make sure we get the right person. Now, just to prove Avimelech is a sample of bad leadership, I'll show you an amazing story. Remember David and Bathsheba? You didn't get there yet. You'll get there in about a month, and about 2-3 weeks, the way you're going 14 prakim a day. But in the story of, it's in Shmuel Bet already. It's going to be in about a month. Where are we? Shmuel Bet, in the story of David and Bathsheba, it's going to be chapter 11 in Shmuel Bet, or chapter 12, let's see. Yeah. The famous story of David and Bathsheba. Okay. When Yoav brings back the report to, he gives the messenger, listen to what Yoav tells the messenger to tell King David. There. Okay. Vaishlach Yoav, we're in chapter 11 in Shmuel Bet. Vaishlach Yoav agela David kol divrei melchama. Vaitzav malach limor, he tells the messenger, saying, when you finish giving the battle report with all the casualties, the king might get angry. How come so many casualties? Vayaki talev chamat hamelech, when he gets angry, hey, what's happening here? V'amar lecha, madu nigashtem el ha'ir lilachem, halu yidatem asher yeru melechoma. Why all the casualties? How come there's so many casualties when he went so close to the wall of the city? When the king gets angry at the battle report, how come there's so many casualties? You should have remembered your study from West Point about military strategy. Don't go too close to the wall because they can shoot arrows from the wall and you'll die. And he brings an example. Mi kat Avimelech ben Yerubeshet. That's Yerubal. That's going to be Gid'on. Halo ishai shlicha la pelach rechev me'al choma ve'emot betevetz. Lama nigash me'al choma ve'martakov gam avtacha uriyah chitimid. What example might the king bring up when he says, why were you so foolish to bring the army so close to the wall? Oh, tell him in that battle Uriah died and he won't get angry anymore. Now, at the end, the Mach never says this story. It never comes up later on. But I think there's a lot of prophetic irony in the example that Yoav brings. He's reminding King David of Avimelech, who got into power, like the worst example, the worst king ever. The first guy to call himself king, Avimelech. and the way a king should not come into power. And David's behavior now is beginning to sound like Abimelech, not caring about human life, and everything is just staying in power, no matter how many people die. So it could be there's a hint here, an allusion here to Abimelech, and that proves my point that Abimelech is the symbol of what Jewish leaders should not be like. Working with rotten people to take power, killing people just to take political power, and just staying in power being your only goal, no matter how many people die. That's going to be the worst type of Jewish leadership. Ideal leadership will be like what Shmuel does, a king doing justice and righteousness. And then calling the leadership Shoftim, I think is ironic as well, almost satirical. Remember, he says, "V'shabtaitchem," we're being judgmental of the people. That basically God is judging the people through these historical events, causing trouble every time they leave God. And then calling the Shoftim, he sends to save them, calling them Shoftim will be sort of ironic. And then we'll talk about next week why Shmuel was called a Shofet, but we finally get a Shofet who does it right, who judges the people and leads them to do proper tshuva, and how that leads to David. I'll take questions now real fast, if there's any questions.
Were these Shoftim related to Sanhedrin at all?
It never mentions that. Is there a Sanhedrin? From Chumash, there's the Ziknei Am all the time.
Right.
It seems like there's at the tribal level, there's some type of moitzah of leaders, like a European Union. There's a tribal alliance. The first one to bring that tribal alliance together will be a little bit Shaul, but primarily David. When we go from a state government to a federal government, when instead of the army being run by every shevet, the army is run by the nation. That'll be the big turnover in when we become a nation instead of a tribal alliance.
I think Rob maybe alluded he's going to discuss it next week, so we can defer this to next week. But again, in the Torah and Shoftim, right? A shofet there is what we would classically consider a shofet. And by the time we get to the Mishnah, a shofet is what we classically consider to be a shofet. And we have this period in the middle where a shofet is not what we consider to be a shofet. Why do we change the tafkid of...
I just think the name shofet in Sefer Shoftim is ironic. Because if I look at that pasuk, when Shmuel says, "Ishabta itchem et kol tzidkot Hashem," Shmuel gives this judgment call. He's judging the people. Remember in this week's parsha, what is Lot tell the people? I mean, what did the people tell Lot? The people want to kick these guests out of town, and Lot tells them, "You guys are evil." Lot is being judgmental of the people's behavior, not allowing him to harbor guests. So Lot calls you people, your values are evil. You're not allowing me to take guests, that's evil. And they tell him, you're new in town and you're being judgmental of us. I know Rashi says he was appointed judge that day. But I think what they're saying is, he says, you're new in town, you're a stranger, and you're telling us how to run our community? Get lost. Mm-hmm. So being judgmental of someone saying, how come I'm right and you're wrong? So God is being judgmental of the people, explaining why God's been right and the people have been wrong. And that's the whole point of the book, where every time things have gone bad, it's because you left God. Things are good because you returned to God. And don't think a king is going to solve all your problems. On the other hand, God wants a king because he wants a nation. I should have brought the other source in the I have it on the source sheet I gave you of why God wants a nation. I should have mentioned that from Sefer Devarim. Remember about Kechol HaGoyim? So remember, I'm teaching you Mishpatim that God commanded me to teach you. Ushmartem basitem hi chochmatchem leinei hamim. So here all these great laws you keep. Chacham medabon hagoy gadol hazeh. Migoy gadol shalom asher Hashem elokim krovim elav kashem elokim krovim elav. Umigoy gadol shalom chukim mishpatim tzadikim kol haTorah azot. Because there's a value of being a great nation, because by being a great nation we can sanctify God if we keep the laws properly. But to be a goy gadol, you need strong central leadership. And therefore, having a king can facilitate fulfilling your covenantal goal of being a nation representing God to the other nations. So when people want a kingdom to achieve their goal to be God's nation, that's fine. But when they want a king just to be like all the other nations, that's bad. That's why, remember what Chazal say? When they asked for a king, everyone for 4 different reasons. Tzadikim, Kenim said Kohen, Elu Shalom Kohen. Everyone agrees we want a king, but everyone for a different reason. Why do we want a Jewish state today? To sanctify God, or not to need God, or to protect ourselves from anti-Semitism? Remember the old argument in the time of Herzl? Is the purpose of the Jewish state is to survive or to sanctify, to be like other nations? That was a big argument with early Zionism.
Right.
So when our common ground is staying alive in survival mode, so we can all agree on the state because we want to stay alive. Once you solve your existential threat of your existence, and now what do we do with our country? Now that we have one, then we start fighting. What's the goal of that Jewish state? But that's already a discussion for modern day times.
So then the summary said Shofet always means what we mean by Shofet, but in Shoftim, in Sefer Shoftim, it's used in this kind of ironic,
in an ironic satirical way, yeah.
Right?
But we'll see next week where the real Shofet is Shmuel. Remember, Shmuel's going to Shofet the people in mitzvah. Vayishpot Shmuel tam b'mitzvah, and they do real tshuva. Want to see what I'm talking about with the word Ishafta again? That proves my point. In chapter 7, Shmuel chapter 7, he says, "Vayomer Shmuel kipshu et mitzpata v'etpalel v'katzu mitzpata v'shubayim shpichu lifnei Hashem v'tzumu b'yamahu chatanu vayishpot Shmuel b'nei Yisrael b'mitzvah." See that? That's a shofet doing real tshuva, which is good because it leads to a war with the Plishtim. We'll talk about that next week. That little act of I didn't share my screen. Did I share my screen? I didn't share my screen. Sorry about that. Here we go. Shmuel Aleph Perek Zayin. Shmuel gathers the people in Mitzvah, and they praise, and they gather in Mitzvah, and they pour water, and they fast, and they do tshuva, they said sin, and then Vayishpot Shmuel b'nei Yisrael b'mitzvah, and that later leads to a war. So that's shiput in the same context, and that's shiput where Imam judges the people, how God's been good to them and they've been bad. So they should remember the idea is people complain about God not saving them. The thing we did with, the reason for Sefer Shoftim is very similar to the reason for Sefer Yoshua. The people are complaining about God, and the job of the Navi says, God's right, you guys are wrong. And basically, Shirat Hazinu, isn't it? Remember, Zchorim Otolam Binushnot Dovador? Remember, Hatzor Tamim Polo, Kehodar Bishpat, El Menabin Abel, Tzek Yasharu, Shichet Lo, Lo, Banabumam, Halashem Tikmuluzot. So the job of the Navi is to tell the people, Zchorim Otolam Binushnot Dovador, that God is always Kichech Hashem Amo. God wants what's good for you. If things are bad, don't blame God for not taking care of you. Blame yourselves for not acting properly as God's people. Doesn't that guide almost every rabbi speech nowadays? If things are bad, it's because of our bad behavior, and don't blame God. And do self-searching and do tshuva and act properly. I think that's what most messages, because we all know Shirat Hazinu by heart. But we just go to the end. God will save us no matter what. And we hope that we hit the fail-safe button. Anyway, that's for Musa Shmuz. So that's our little take into Sefer Shoftim. Next week, we'll do the end of Sefer Shoftim and talk about the parallel between Shimshon and pay attention if you didn't read it yet, the parallel between Shimshon and Shmuel, and how Nazirut could go for good or for bad, and how leadership develops. But that'll put the icing on the cake that I need Sefer Shoftim for the time period of Shmuel to explain why I need a king. And we'll do the stories at the end of Sefer Shoftim. Speaking of prophetic satire, there's probably no better satire than those stories at the end of Sefer Shoftim. Are just full of satire. That's why they're so interesting to read. Okay, everyone have a good week, everybody, and keep up your 2 prakim a day.